never expected a text from my next-door neighbor to unravel the biggest betrayal of my adult life. Her name is Sandra. She's lived next door for 11 years, waters her roses every morning, waves when she sees my truck backing out of the driveway. She's the kind of neighbor you take for granted until the day you really need her. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in a Marriott outside Boise, Idaho, flat on my back after 14 hours on a sales route, shoes still on, laptop balanced on my chest. The text said, "Hey Ray, just wanted to check, is your brother staying with you? There's been a car in your driveway almost every night this week. Blue Honda. Didn't want to be nosy, but it's been a few nights and I know you travel." I stared at that message for a long time. My name is Ray Callahan. I'm 52, divorced 8 years, and I've been a regional pharmaceutical sales rep for going on 19 years. My territory covers the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, parts of Montana. In a good month, I'm home maybe 9 days. The rest of it is hotels and rental cars and drive-thrus, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing your own bed better by absence than by presence. I bought my house in Beaverton, Oregon in 2008. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a backyard with a Douglas fir that drops needles on everything in October. It's a good house in a quiet neighborhood. I bought it because I needed something that was mine, something that stayed put while I moved constantly. It was supposed to be my anchor. I don't have a brother. I texted Sandra back immediately. No one should be there. I'm in Boise. What kind of car did you say? She sent a photo. Blue Honda Civic, Oregon plates, parked in my driveway at what looked like 10 at night based on the timestamp. The porch light was off. I always leave the porch light on a timer. Someone had turned it off. I sat up on that hotel bed and felt the blood drain from my face. My first instinct was to call the police right then. But I stopped myself because I thought about what I actually had. A car in a driveway. That's it, for all a dispatcher knew. It could be a friend I'd given a key to, a contractor, someone with legitimate access. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I made a move I couldn't take back. I've spent 2 decades in sales. I know you don't open your mouth before you know your position. I called Sandra. She picked up on the second ring and told me she'd seen the car 3 or 4 times in the past 2 weeks, always late afternoon into evening, always gone by morning. She'd assumed I knew about it. She felt terrible. I told her not to, that she'd done exactly the right thing, and I asked her to text me if she saw it again. Then I hung up and didn't sleep that night. I rearranged my schedule the next morning, pushed 2 appointments back, and drove the 6 hours home in one stretch without stopping except for gas. I didn't go straight to my house. I parked 2 blocks away at a strip mall and waited. It was a Thursday mid-afternoon. My street was quiet. A woman walking a golden retriever, a FedEx truck making a stop. Normal suburban nothing. At 4:40 in the afternoon, the blue Civic turned onto my street and pulled into my driveway. I watched through my windshield as a man got out. He looked to be in his mid-40s, heavy-set, wearing a gray fleece and jeans. He had a key. He unlocked my front door and walked inside like he'd been doing it for years. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes running scenarios. Squatter, ex-tenant who'd copied a key, but I'd only ever owned the house, never rented it out. Someone connected to the previous owners? Nothing made sense. What I did know was that confronting him alone, without knowing anything about him, was the kind of decision that could go wrong in a dozen directions. So I drove to the nearest Home Depot, bought 3 wireless security cameras, and checked into a La Quinta 3 miles from my house. I called the non-emergency line that evening. The officer I spoke with was patient and thorough, but his answer was the same thing I'd been half expecting. Without proof of forced entry, without evidence that this person didn't have some claim to being there, it was complicated. He said the word complicated the way people say it when they mean not my problem yet. What he told me, and I wrote it down on the hotel notepad, was that documented evidence of unauthorized entry security footage showing the pattern of behavior. That would give them something solid to work with. He said to call back once I had that, so that's what I did. The next afternoon, I went back to my house while I was sure the man was gone. Sandra texted me when she saw the Civic leave around noon. I let myself in through the back, through the sliding door off the kitchen that I always leave with a specific lock position. I'd recognize if someone had tampered with it. They hadn't. Whoever had access had a key to the front door. Walking through my own house felt like walking through a dream. Everything was almost right, but not quite. There was a coffee maker on my kitchen counter that wasn't mine, a black Keurig, still warm. There were 2 coffee pods in the trash that I didn't buy. My couch had a blanket draped over the back of it that I'd never seen before. A fleece blanket, dark green, folded neatly, like someone lived there. Like someone had decided to make the place comfortable. I moved through the rooms slowly. The guest bathroom had a razor on the sink, a can of shaving cream, a bar of Irish Springs still in the wrapper. The medicine cabinet had 2 prescription bottles in someone else's name. I took photos of everything without touching anything. In the guest bedroom, the bed had been slept in and the sheets changed. My sheets, from the hall closet, but made up differently than I'd left them. There was a paperback on the nightstand, a duffel bag on the floor, unzipped with clothes folded inside. And in the kitchen, tucked behind the fruit bowl I keep on the counter, there was a small wireless router, not mine. That's when my stomach dropped all the way to the floor. I set up the cameras as quickly and quietly as I could. One in the living room behind a row of books on the shelf, angled to cover the front door and the main open plan area. One in the kitchen mounted above the cabinets, aimed at the counter and the back door. One in the hallway between the bedrooms. I set up the app on my phone and drove back to the La Quinta. I ordered a pizza I didn't eat and watched the camera feeds until midnight. At 4018 the next afternoon, the Civic was back. I watched the man come in through the front door on my phone screen. He went straight to the kitchen, opened my refrigerator, and pulled out what looked like a deli container he'd put in there himself. He ate standing at the counter. He was completely relaxed. He moved through my kitchen like he'd been doing it for months. And maybe he had. I documented everything over the next 4 days. He arrived mid to late afternoon every day. He used my shower. I could hear the water running through the microphone on the hall camera. He watched TV in the living room, used my Wi-Fi, which I confirmed when I checked my router app and found a device I didn't recognize that had apparently been connected for weeks. He left every morning before 7. Then, on the 5th day, someone else showed up. It was a Saturday. At 11 in the morning, a woman knocked on my front door. She was in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back, carrying a canvas tote bag and a coffee. The man answered the door and let her in. From the body language on camera, they knew each other. The easy familiarity of people who've worked together. They sat at my dining room table. She pulled a laptop out of the tote. He pulled out a folder. They were there for 2 hours. I watched on my phone from the La Quinta, zooming in every time the camera gave me a clear angle on what was on that table. At one point, she turned the laptop screen toward him, and I could make out what looked like a property listing. There was a number at the top I couldn't fully read, but the layout was unmistakable. I'd spent enough time booking hotels online to recognize a Vrbo listing when I saw one. I opened my laptop and searched my address on Vrbo, then Airbnb, then Furnished Finder. There it was, on Furnished Finder. My house. Quiet Beaverton home, fully furnished, ideal for traveling professionals. All utilities included. Flexible lease terms. There were photos of my living room, my kitchen, my backyard with a Douglas fir. The listing had been active for 11 weeks. Monthly rate, $2,200. There were reviews, 4 of them all positive. Great location, clean, well-stocked kitchen. Host was communicative and accommodating. Felt like home. Felt like home. It was my home. My hands were shaking when I started searching the name I'd caught on one of the documents during their meeting. I'd managed to screenshot a partial view of a header, the name Kevin, and below it what looked like a property management company name. I started with Kevin, Property Manager, Beaverton, Oregon, and within 20 minutes I had him. Kevin Marsh, owner of Marsh Property Solutions, a small Portland-based property management firm. His website said he specialized in mid-term furnished rentals and property optimization for frequent travelers and remote workers. His LinkedIn photo matched the man in my house. The woman took longer, but I caught a break when the doorbell camera picked up their goodbye at the front door, and I heard him call her by name. Diane. I found her eventually. Diane Cortez, a freelance photographer based in Portland who, according to her Instagram and website, also did real estate and short-term rental photography and staging. She was the one who had taken the pictures of my house. I recognized the angles, the light, the way she'd staged the coffee maker I'd never bought on the counter to make the kitchen look warm and lived in. But the question I couldn't answer yet was the most important one. How had Kevin Marsh gotten a key to my house? I went back through every moment of footage I had. I watched the recordings twice, 3 times. On the 3rd day of surveillance, Kevin had answered the door to someone at 11 in the morning while I was at the hotel. An older man, 60s, wearing a company polo shirt. I froze the frame and zoomed in. The logo on the shirt was a small house with a clock face inside it. I searched the image description and found it in about 10 minutes. Timely Home Services, a property maintenance and home watch company based in Tualatin, Oregon. A company I had hired 2 years ago to check on my house when I was on long stretches of road. A company I paid $80 a month to drive by twice a week, collect my mail, run the faucets so the pipes didn't freeze, and hold a spare key. A company that had my schedule, because I emailed them every month with my travel calendar so they'd know when I was gone. I called my contact at Timely Home Services the next morning. His name was Phil, and he was the owner, a guy I'd met once in person when I first signed the contract. I asked him some careful questions, whether the company had any relationship with local property managers, whether client information was shared with outside contractors. I kept my voice neutral, the way you learn to in sales when you're trying not to tip your hand. There was a long pause before he answered. He said he didn't think so. He said it wasn't their policy. But something in his voice went careful, and I noticed it. I told him I was following up because I'd had some unusual activity at my house and I was looking into all my contractors. He said he'd look into it and get back to me. He never did. I kept watching the cameras. On the 11th day of surveillance, Kevin and Diane had another meeting at my house, and this time the audio was clear enough. I had it all on recording. Diane said the current tenant's lease was up at the end of the month, and she'd already had 2 inquiries for the next booking. Kevin said they needed to rotate to one of the other properties next anyway because he'd started getting a nervous feeling about this one. He said the owner was always gone, but he didn't like holding anything too long. Diane said they'd made over $14,000 off my property in the 11 weeks it had been listed. Other properties, plural. The next day I drove to the Beaverton Police Department with my phone, my laptop, an external hard drive with all the footage, and a folder of printed screenshots and documentation I'd been assembling for 2 weeks. The detective I met with was a man named Art Figueroa, heavyset with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, who listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I was done, he looked at my footage folder and said, "Mr. Callahan, this is a lot of work." I told him I knew. He said this fell under multiple statutes: criminal trespass, fraud, theft of services, potentially wire fraud given the online listings and electronic payments. He asked about Timely Home Services, and I told him what I knew. He said they'd need to investigate the connection. He asked if I had any idea how many other properties might be involved. I told him Kevin had mentioned other properties in the recording, but I didn't know specifics. Detective Figueroa took it from there. Over the following 3 weeks, his team built the case. They subpoenaed records from Furnished Finder and identified 4 other properties Kevin Marsh had listed without owner authorization. All 4 owners, like me, traveled frequently for work. All four had used Timely Home Services. When investigators brought Phil Rennick, the owner of Timely, in for questioning, it came apart quickly. He'd been approached by Kevin 6 months earlier. The arrangement was simple and ugly. Phil would flag clients who traveled frequently and were unlikely to notice activity at their homes, hand over spare keys, provide schedules. Kevin would list the properties, find tenants, collect the rent. Phil got 15% of the take. They'd made just over $60,000 total across 5 properties in less than a year. The arrests happened on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't there for Kevin's, but I was in the parking lot across the street from my own house when the officers went to the door. A woman in her 30s answered, a tenant, innocent, who'd booked what she thought was a legitimate furnished rental for a 3-month work contract and had no idea anything was wrong. She stood on my front porch looking stunned while officers explained the situation to her. I felt bad for her. She'd paid real money for a place to live and gotten caught in someone else's crime. Kevin Marsh was charged with first-degree criminal trespass, second-degree fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. Diane Cortez, who'd photographed and listed the properties while knowing they weren't Kevin's to rent, was charged with conspiracy and fraud. Phil Rennick was charged with theft by deception and breach of fiduciary duty to his clients. Oregon has specific statutes around home watch contractors, people who are literally paid for trust, and the prosecutor leaned on that hard. I had to testify at the trial 7 months later. Kevin's attorney tried the argument that the tenants had signed lease agreements and paid through a legitimate platform, making this a civil landlord dispute rather than criminal fraud. The judge was not interested in that framing. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Kevin got 3 years in Oregon State Prison and 5 years probation. Diane got 18 months. Phil, who cooperated and provided detailed testimony, received a suspended sentence, 3 years probation, and was permanently barred from operating any kind of property services business in the state. The 5 of us who'd been victimized split a restitution judgment. My portion came to a little over $11,000. It covered roughly what I could document: the fraudulent utility costs, the security system I installed afterward, the locksmith fees, the 3 weeks of hotel bills while I couldn't stay in my own house. What it didn't cover was the other stuff, the part that doesn't have a number. I remember the week after I was finally able to go back home, after the locks were changed and the cameras were professional grade and the tenants' belongings had been removed by police. I walked through the rooms and tried to feel like it was mine again. I made coffee in my kitchen, sat on my couch, watched TV, and I kept seeing him in there. Kevin in my kitchen eating food he'd stocked in my refrigerator. Kevin in my guest shower. Kevin answering my front door like he owned the place while I was in some hotel outside Boise, thinking my house was sitting empty. The rooms looked the same, but they felt different, like something had been altered at the molecular level and I couldn't get it back to what it was. I stayed for 8 months. Then I sold it. I bought a condo in a mid-rise building in northwest Portland. Doorman, fob entry, cameras in all the common areas. My unit has a smart lock I control from my phone, and I can see who's at the door from anywhere in the country. I have a camera inside now too. I check it when I'm in hotels in Boise and Sacramento and Spokane. The way some people check the news or scroll their phones is just part of my routine now. I think about the other 4 homeowners sometimes. One of them, a woman named Patricia who worked as a traveling nurse, found out that the tenant who'd stayed in her house for 6 weeks had hosted a party that damaged her kitchen floor. She never got fully compensated for it. Another one, a guy named Dennis, who drove long haul like Derek in the story. Well, I guess like a lot of us, found out his home office had been used to film content for some kind of online course, his bookshelves and desk in the background of videos that strangers had watched, his personal space repurposed as someone else's professional backdrop. There's a specific violation in this kind of crime that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. A break-in is traumatic, but there's a clarity to it. Someone smashed a window, took your things, left. This was different. This was sustained and domestic. Someone had learned the rhythms of my house. They knew which burners on my stove ran hot. They knew the back bedroom got cold in the morning. They'd picked up the shorthand of my space, the particular arrangement of a life that was supposed to be private, and they'd sold access to it. 11 weeks of other people moving through my rooms, sleeping in my guest bed, using my shower, opening my refrigerator. Strangers who thought they'd paid for the experience. I've had people ask me why I didn't just call the police the night Sandra texted me, get someone out there, and handle it in an hour. I understand why it seems that simple, but I knew enough to know that without evidence of forced entry, without documentation of what was actually happening, the best-case scenario was someone being temporarily removed while claiming they had permission, and then the whole thing falling apart legally. I needed the footage. I needed the paper trail. I needed Kevin on recording talking about $14,000 and other properties. A police report filed on a hunch based on a neighbor's text about a car in a driveway would have tipped him off and given him time to cover his tracks. The 2 weeks I spent building the case were the 2 worst weeks of my life, but they were the reason Kevin Marsh is serving 3 years instead of walking away. Timely Home Services is gone. Phil dissolved the company 2 weeks after his arrest. The building that housed the office is now a nail salon. None of the other contractors I've talked to since have heard of Kevin Marsh operating anything under his own name. I learned things from this that I wish had cost me less to learn. If you travel for work and you own property, your home is not as secure as your peace of mind assumes. That spare key you gave to a contractor, do you know exactly who else in that company can access it? Do you know if they've copied it? Do you know what they do with your schedule when you email it to them? The trust we extend to home watch companies and property managers is enormous, and most of them deserve it. Phil Rennick is an outlier, but outliers exist. Install cameras. I know it feels paranoid and invasive to put cameras in your own home, like you're surveilling your own life. Get over that feeling. Cameras were the only reason Kevin Marsh is in prison instead of still running my guest room as a furnished rental. They were the difference between suspicion and prosecution. Monitor your utilities. Check your accounts monthly. A spike in electricity or water usage when you're supposedly not home is one of the first signs, and it's a sign you can catch early if you're paying attention. Tell your neighbors, specifically, not generally. Don't just wave at Sandra and assume she'll know to call you if something's off. Tell her, when I'm traveling, no one should be coming and going from my house. If you see anything, call me directly. That one conversation could have saved me 2 months of fraud if I'd had it years earlier. Check the rental platforms. Search your own address on Airbnb, Verbo, Furnished Finder, Facebook Marketplace. It takes 5 minutes. It would have taken me 5 minutes back in January, and I'd have found the listing before Kevin made $14,000 from my house. If you discover something like this, don't confront it alone and don't let anger rush your hand. Get the documentation first. Get the recording, the screenshots, the dates and times. Then go to the police with something they can build a case on. The instinct to storm in and confront the person is human and understandable, and I felt it every single day for those 2 weeks. But the outcome of this story, the convictions, the restitution, the fact that 4 other properties got protected, none of that happens if I let the anger drive. I drove past my old house last spring. The new owners have repainted the front door red. There's a kid's bicycle in the driveway and a planter box under the front window with purple flowers I don't know the name of. It looked exactly like a home should look. Lived in by the right people. I hoped they'd checked the rental platforms. I hoped they'd told their neighbors. I hoped they'd never have reason to know what I know about the way an empty house can become someone else's inventory while you're 3 states away thinking everything back home is just waiting quietly for you to return. Most of the time it is, but sometimes it isn't, and the distance between those 2 possibilities is a lot smaller than any of us want to believe. The thing I keep coming back to years later is how ordinary Kevin Marsh looked walking up my driveway. Gray fleece, jeans, gym bag. He looked like someone's neighbor, someone's co-worker. He looked like a man who had every right to be exactly where he was. That's the part nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It wears the clothes of the normal world and counts on you not looking too closely. Phil Rennick counted on that too. He ran a home watch business for years on the back of trust, the particular trust that exists between a homeowner who's never there and the person they pay to care for what they've left behind. When Kevin approached him with the scheme, Phil made a choice. He decided that the $80 a month I paid him, multiplied across a client list of people just like me, wasn't enough. He decided my schedule, my spare key, my absence were assets he could sell. That choice had a cost. It always does. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but the ledger catches up. I think about the 2 weeks I spent in that La Quinta, watching camera feeds on my phone instead of sleeping, building a folder of screenshots at midnight like some kind of amateur investigator. I didn't feel brave doing it. I felt exhausted and angry and, more than anything, stupid. The way you feel when you realize you trusted something that had been quietly working against you the whole time. But I kept doing it anyway because I understood that anger without documentation is just noise. What I needed wasn't to feel vindicated. I needed to be right in a way that held up in a courtroom. That discipline, the patience to build the case when every instinct is screaming at you to act, is the thing I'm most grateful I found in myself during those 2 weeks. It didn't come naturally. I wanted to walk through my own front door and tell Kevin Marsh exactly what I thought of him. Instead, I sat in a hotel parking lot and pressed record. There's something in the way this whole thing unfolded that I've spent a long time thinking about. Kevin was intelligent in the tactical sense. He found a gap. He exploited a system. He built a small operation that ran for months without anyone noticing. But intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to cause damage. He was sharp enough to run the scheme and not sharp enough to understand what it would cost him. Phil was the same. They both mistook cleverness for wisdom, and the distance between those two things is exactly where their lives fell apart. I came out of this with something I didn't have going in, not just the cameras and the smart lock and the habit of checking my address on rental platforms every few months. Something quieter than that, a clearer sense of what it actually takes to protect the things that matter to you. Not just the house, but your own capacity to act when acting is hard. To think when thinking is the last thing you want to do. To hold on to your integrity when the easier path is to blow everything up in a single angry confrontation. Ray Callahan, sales rep, 19 years on the road. I turned out to be better at this than I thought I was. I'm not sure I would have known that without Kevin Marsh forcing the question. I hope nobody reading this ever has to find out the same way I did. But if you do, trust yourself enough to be methodical. The truth doesn't need you to be loud. It just needs you to show up with the receipts.